The Thief Who Became a King. Chapter 1. The Boy Beneath the City. Rats moved first. They came out of cracks in brick and gaps in pipe seams, pale shapes with wet fur, their backs shining like oil in the torch glow. They poured toward the drowned cart as if the water itself had called them. The cart sat half-tipped in the canal, its wheel caught on a bent iron rail, its cargo spilled and soaked. A broken crate floated nearby, bumping the wood with a soft thud each time the current pulled it back. Silas watched from a pipe ledge above the canal. He balanced with his boots on slick metal, one hand braced on the wall, the other resting on his knee. His body stayed still, but his eyes did not. He followed the rats as they climbed, as they fought, as they tore. They did not fear the water. They did not fear the stench. They had lived in it long enough for it to feel like air. Silas had, too. Below him, men waded into the market canal, water up to their shins, dragging the cart closer to the stone lip so they could reach it. They swore and shoved, and one man slapped at a rat that tried to claim a sack before he did. The rat bit him hard enough to draw a sharp sound from the man's throat, and the man flung it away, spattering the canal. Nobody spared a thought for the rat. Nobody spared a thought for the man either. This was the lower flow. Everything here belonged to whoever held it. A dozen stalls huddled along the canal edge where the tunnel widened. Lanterns hung from hooks hammered into mortar. Smoke clung to the ceiling and drifted down in sheets. The ground was a mix of brick, slime, and old ash. A line of traders stood close to their goods, hands near pockets, eyes on every motion. Their wares sat on cloths that had once been bright, now stained the color of old tea. Mold-speckled bread, soap cut into thin bars, nails pulled from scrap wood and straightened over heat, a small bottle of clean oil, guarded like a jewel, a bundle of dried herbs wrapped in paper that had once been part of a book. Trade here was never polite. A woman offered a fish wrapped in wax cloth. A man offered a length of copper wire. They argued in low voices, their faces close, their hands moving as if they were both praying. A child held the fish for a moment, then lost it when the woman yanked it back and hissed something that made the child step away. Near the far wall, two men settled a debt. One pressed a knife point to the other man's throat without raising his voice. The other man placed 3 coins on a stone. The knife did not move until the coins were counted, then counted again, then pushed aside. Silas listened to none of it. He listened to all of it. He slid along the pipe ledge, moving with the easy care of someone who had fallen before and learned. Below, a merchant from the surface stood on a dry patch of brick near the center of the market, his boots too clean, his coat too thick. He held a lantern high, and the light made his face look bright and soft, like he belonged in another world. He did not. 2 guards stood behind him, and both pretended to watch the crowd. Their eyes moved in quick, small jumps that gave them away. The merchant carried a satchel at his hip. It was not a common sack. The leather was treated, the seams tight, the clasp made of brass that would not snap under strain. It was sealed with a wax stamp that had not been broken. Silas waited. He watched how the merchant shifted his weight when he spoke. He watched how the guards set their feet, wide for balance, as if they expected trouble. He watched the crowd too, because the crowd could be worse than guards. A crowd had no oath and no pay. A crowd only had hunger. He raised his hand and made a small motion with 2 fingers. His gang saw it without turning their heads. 3 shapes drifted apart at once, like debris in water. A tall boy with a scar on his chin moved toward the fish stall. A woman with gray hair tucked under a cap stepped into the stream of foot traffic. Another man slid behind a lantern post and became part of the shadow it cast. Silas slipped down from the pipe ledge behind a stack of damp crates. He did not climb. He did not jump. He lowered himself and landed like a piece of cloth falling. He moved through the market without pushing anyone. People moved for him instead. They did not greet him. They did not smile. They did not pretend not to look. They stepped aside the way people stepped aside for a leak in a tunnel wall. You did not argue with it. You did not insult it. You simply did not stand where it would hit you. Silas let them. The surface merchant raised his voice for a moment, trying to sound firm. He spoke of clean steel needles, of salt, of a cloth bundle with medicine inside. His words did not matter. Only the satchel mattered. Silas passed behind the merchant and kept walking, as if he had no interest at all. The merchant did not turn, because nobody from the surface ever believed danger could be quiet. Silas took 3 more steps. Then he stopped beside a man arguing over copper wire. The guards shifted their stance to see around bodies. That was the point. Silas turned back through the crowd, sliding between shoulders, his hands low. He brushed the merchant's coat as if by accident. 2 fingers found the satchel clasp. His thumb felt the wax seal. He did not break it. He did not need to. He lifted the satchel by the strap, moved it behind his leg, and let it fall into the crook of his elbow under his own coat. A clean motion, a small motion, the sort of motion that did not exist if nobody decided to notice it. Silas did not look at the merchant's face. He did not look at the guards. He kept walking. Behind him, a scuffle broke out near the fish stall. The tall boy with the scar shoved a man hard enough to make lantern light dance. Voices rose. A bottle tipped and smashed. Someone shouted. The guards turned their heads in the same instant, drawn by noise the way rats were drawn by blood. Silas slipped out of the center of the market. He did not run. Running made people count heads. He moved into a narrower side tunnel where the air grew warmer and thicker. His gang peeled away from their places and followed without speaking. The gray-haired woman came last, her hands tucked in her sleeves as if she carried nothing. Silas did not grin. He did not laugh. He did not even breathe out in relief. He only kept going. In a low passage near a sewage sluice, where the canal narrowed and rushed through iron bars, Silas stopped. The sluice roared like an angry throat. Foam churned along the edges, and the stink was sharp enough to make the eyes sting. He leaned against the wall and opened the satchel. Coins gleamed inside, tight stacked and wrapped. A folded paper packet. A small vial sealed with cork. A thin chain with a metal tag that held a surface crest. Silas did not admire any of it. He counted the coins with quick hands and quicker eyes, one by one, then again in groups, then once more, because mistakes were how people died. He finished and tied the sack shut. He stared at the vial for a moment. Clean glass, clear liquid. He could eat tonight. He could sleep dry. He could buy oil for lamps and cloth for bandages. He could keep breathing. A small sound came from the tunnel mouth behind him, quick and light. A child, barely more than a shadow. The child darted toward him with a hand already reaching. Silas caught the wrist without turning fully. His grip was firm, not crushing. He could have broken bone. He did not. Needle froze. Her eyes were wide and her face was smeared with soot. A braid hung over one shoulder. A thin knife sat tucked into her belt, the handle wrapped in twine. She was shaking, but she held her chin up like it was a weapon. Behind her, somewhere in the market tunnels, a man's voice shouted, "Angry! Close!" Needle tried to pull free. Silas tightened his grip just enough to stop her from moving. "Not mine," Needle said, too quick, as if the words could make it true. Silas glanced past her, down the passage. He saw 2 figures approaching, their lantern throwing long bars of light. Needle's eyes flicked to his satchel. Hunger showed on her face like a bruise. Silas could have shoved her back into the market and walked away. He had done worse for less. Instead, he pulled her into the shadow beside the sluice and pressed her flat against the wall with his forearm. He kept his body between her and the tunnel mouth. The 2 figures walked past. They did not look into the shadow. They did not look at Silas. They did not look at anything except the idea of catching someone smaller than themselves. When their lantern light faded, Silas released Needle's wrist. She rubbed it once and did not thank him. Silas did not ask for thanks. He nodded toward a side grate half hidden under moss. "Go," he said. Needle hesitated. Then she slid through the grate like a rat, fast and silent, gone into a crawlway only a child could use. Silas watched the grate settle back into place. He stood there for a long moment, listening to the sluice roar. Then he tucked the satchel inside his coat, turned away from the rushing water, and walked deeper into the tunnel, alone. The market noise was far behind him now. The rats would finish the drowned cart. The traders would count their coins. The guards would curse and blame each other. Silas moved through it all like a rumor that never became a name. Water came first. It slid along the floor in a thin sheet, quiet enough that nobody noticed until boots began to slip. Then the sound grew teeth. The canal upstream had swelled from rain, pushing against walls never meant to carry that much weight. Silas felt the shift through his soles before he heard it. The tunnel gave a long, tired groan, the sort that came from old stone that had held too much for too long. Someone shouted. The lanterns wavered. Shadows bent and tore. A seam split along the arch above the medicine stall, bricks cracking loose with a sound like bone. A slab of ceiling dropped into the canal and vanished under foam. More stone followed. Dust filled the air and turned every cough into a bark. People ran. They ran without looking back, splashing through the first rush of flood water, knocking one another aside, dropping sacks and baskets that vanished under churning brown flow. A woman slipped and was pulled upright by a stranger. Then both were gone into the dark. Silas did not run at once. He saw the healer when the first wave struck. She had been standing near the stall with a bundle of bandages on her shoulder. When the wall collapsed, a beam from an old scaffold tore free and fell across her legs, pinning her to the stone lip of the canal. She hit the floor hard enough that her lantern burst, leaving her in a spill of broken glass and smoke. The next surge of water slammed into the beam and forced it tighter. Silas took a step back. The tunnel was filling. He could feel the pull around his boots already. He could turn and reach high ground in seconds. He knew the way. He always did. He took another step away. Then the healer cried out, not loud, not pleading. Just a sharp sound torn from the chest, the sound of someone who had tried to move and found that they could not. Silas swore under his breath. He ran back into the water. It reached his knees by the time he hit the fallen beam. The canal roared now, froth slamming into the stone ledge, the current tugging at his legs like hands. He braced his shoulder against the wood and shoved. The beam did not move. He dug his fingers under the edge and tried again. The skin split along his palm where a nail head tore free from rotten timber. He did not stop. He shifted his grip and pushed until the muscles in his back burned. The healer tried to pull herself free, failed, and went still, her breath coming in short cuts. "Do not move," Silas said. He did not know her name. He did not wait for her to answer. Another wave hit and knocked him sideways. He caught himself on the beam, felt the torn skin slide, and hissed through his teeth. The water reached his thighs now, heavy, cold, loud enough to make words feel foolish. Silas wedged his boot under the beam, pressed his shoulder higher, and leaned in with everything he had left. The wood gave a sound like tearing cloth. The beam shifted enough to open a narrow space. He shoved again, and this time it lifted. The healer dragged herself clear with a cry that was half breath, half pain. Silas caught her by the collar and hauled her away from the edge, just as the beam dropped back into place. They sprawled against the tunnel wall, the water racing past where she had been. Silas did not stay to see if the ceiling would fall again. He pulled her farther down the passage to a spot where the floor rose. When he let go, his hands were slick and red. The healer looked at them first, not at his face. "You are torn," she said. Silas tried to pull away. She caught his wrist with a grip stronger than he expected. "Hold," she said. She tore a strip from her own sleeve and wrapped his palm with quick, practiced turns, tying it off without asking anything at all. She did the same for the other hand, working by touch while water and dust thundered behind them. When she finished, she sat back against the wall and shut her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and met his gaze. "Thank you," she said. "Once." Silas nodded, as if she had passed him in a corridor, as if nothing had happened at all. He turned and walked away before she could say anything else. The canal beyond the market tunnels widened into a wash basin where wastewater slowed before vanishing through iron bars. Silas knelt at the edge and pushed his hands under the flow. The water stung the torn skin, but the ache was steady, clean. He let it run until the grit slid away and the cloth wraps darkened and sagged. Someone stood behind him. He did not turn. People who wanted his back never announced themselves. "You will catch chill like that," a voice said, thin and old. Silas straightened a little, not enough to show his face. He rinsed one palm, then the other, watching the filth drift off in lazy streaks. The voice took a step closer. A shadow fell across the water. Old Bram had watched him steal before. He had watched him move through crowds and vanish through gaps too small for most bodies. Silas had noticed the watching and let it continue because old men made poor threats. This time Bram stared at the back of his neck. Silas reached up to drag damp hair out of his face. When he bent, the collar of his cloak slid aside. The water lapped at his waist, dark and thick. Bram made a sound that was not a word. Silas felt the stare land like weight. He half-turned, ready to curse, and saw Bram's hands trembling in front of his chest as if he had forgotten how to keep them still. "Do not," Bram whispered. His mouth shaped a name that did not finish forming. Silas rose in one motion and shoved the old man back with his shoulder. Bram stumbled, caught himself on the wall, and nearly went under. "Keep your mouth shut," Silas said. His tone was flat, not loud. "You think you know me, you do not." Bram stared at him with wet eyes, breathing as if he had been running. "The mark," Bram said. "Behind your ear." Silas touched the place without meaning to. His fingers brushed skin that had always been there, a patch he had never been able to scrub clean. "It is nothing," Silas said. Bram shook his head. "It is not dirt. It is not stain. It is shape." He stepped closer again, slow, as if Silas were a thing that might shatter. "It is a ring of small forms, teeth and tails, a crown made of rats. I have seen it once before." Silas pushed him back again, harder this time. "You are wrong." "I am not," Bram said, his voice breaking. "It was on the king's child." The words slid into the water and sank. Silas stood still. The canal pressed against his legs, the pull steady as breath. He looked down and saw his face ripple across the black surface, stretched and torn by current. He looked for something new in it. He found only himself. Bram said very softly, "You were not born in the sewer." Silas did not answer. He stayed there, waist deep in dark flow, watching his reflection bend and unbend, until the words lost their shape, and the water carried them away. Chapter 2. Ghosts of a Dead Throne. They left the living tunnels behind. Bram took a narrow turn that Silas had passed 100 times without seeing it. The passage sloped down and away from sound. The drip of water grew slower, heavier, as if the walls were tired of holding it. Old brick gave way to stone blocks cut with care, their seams still sharp after years of dark. Silas brushed his fingers over a carving half lost under lime crust. It was not a rat. It was not a sewer mark. It was a line of shapes that bent and folded into something that almost looked like order. He did not say this. They walked in single file through a throat of tunnel braced with arches that carried symbols too shallow to read. Bram moved ahead with the pace of someone counting steps he had not taken in decades. At the end of the passage, the floor dropped into a wide hollow where water once rested in silence. Lantern light could not hold the space at once. It fell in pieces, showing a curve of wall here, a heap of stone there, a ceiling broken open to roots that hung like veins. This was a cistern, Bram said, as if the word were an apology. The chamber had not been built for waste. The walls were dressed stone, pale under grime. A dais rose at the far side, its edge buried in dark silt that looked soft enough to swallow a boot. Two shapes flanked it, low and wide, their backs rounded like the shells of sleeping beasts. Silas did not need Bram to tell him what they were. Thrones. They lay on their sides, half buried, their carvings chewed away by damp. A sheet of gold leaf clung to one armrest, puckered and black with mold, like skin left too long in water. Bram crossed the chamber and knelt at the foot of the dais without slowing, his knees sinking into the silt as if the floor had been waiting for him. He put his hands on the stone and bowed his head. Silas stayed where he was. Bram spoke to the ground. "We kept ledgers here, trade lists. Who could draw from which well and how much? We had marks for floods, for heat, for sickness." His voice was low and level, like he had practiced it in rooms that no longer existed. There were roots that never touched the surface. Carts rolled under the city while the people above slept. Salt from the river mouth, grain from the high tunnels. Copper pulled from spoil piles and carried through waterways no guard ever saw. He lifted one hand and traced a line in the dust along the dais edge. Aquifers had names. You could not dig without record. You could not poison a flow and claim mistake. We had courts here when the lamps burned clean. Men and women stood where you stand now, and settled quarrels that did not spill into blood. Silas looked around at the rot. The ceiling gap breathed cold. Drops fell in slow, patient time. A rat skittered across one fallen throne and vanished into a seam. "They say we were always this," Bram went on. "They say the dark has no order, only hunger." His fingers curled into the grit. "It is easier to believe that than to believe something was broken." He pushed himself upright with care and faced Silas at last. His eyes were rimmed with red. "The crown was not for command," he said. "It was for witness. We wore it when we swore to hold what ran beneath our feet. The rest was done in boots and mud." Silas gave no sign that he heard any of it. He walked to the nearest throne and put his hand on the stone. It was colder than the tunnels he knew. It did not fit his palm the way pipe and brick did. He did not imagine himself sitting there. He did not imagine anything at all. When he turned away, Bram did not try to stop him. They climbed back through the floodway in silence, leaving the chamber to its water and its gold that would never shine again. Silas ran his hand along the cistern wall where water once rested without sound. The stone felt smoother here, worn by palms that no longer touched it. He traced a seam where two blocks met, then another, following a pattern he could not name. Bram spoke behind him, not looking at anything that still existed. He was called necessary, Bram said. Not loved, not trusted. Necessary. Silas pressed his fingers into a shallow groove. Flakes of mold clung to his skin. They praised him for discipline, Bram went on, for keeping accounts when others grew tired, for speaking in rooms where silence made people afraid. Silas moved to the base of the dais and rested his hand on the stone edge. The cold felt deeper there. The feast was his idea, Bram said. A night to show the court that order could wear silk. Silas closed his eyes and let the cistern fade. The hall was bright again. Lamps hung clean from hooks. Plates of fruit and bread filled the tables. The royal children laughed at a juggler who pretended to drop knives and never did. Voss stood near the king's chair, pale hands folded, smiling at nothing in particular. Silas dragged his fingers through a patch of silt at the dais foot. The wine was clear, Bram said. It smelled like crushed berries and summer heat. The king lifted his cup. He did not know that the liquid had been laced with a draught that stilled breath before it stilled heart. He did not know that Voss had mixed it himself in a quiet room with a door that locked. Silas brushed grit from his knuckles and stood. They laughed at first, Bram said. When their limbs grew slow, they thought it was drink. The king tried to rise to call for help. His hands slid from the chair arms as if the wood had turned to oil. His legs refused him. He sank back with a sound that did not reach his mouth. Silas leaned closer to one fallen throne. The stone held a shallow dent where someone had struck it long ago. Voss went to them, Bram said. Not in haste, not with anger. He bent near each face and spoke in tones meant for comfort. In the hall, the queen's eyes widened as she felt her lungs labor. Voss took her hand and told her a story about a garden she loved, about roses that had never grown near sewage or smoke. The words came soft and slow, timed the failing draw of her breath. Silas touched the throne armrest. The gold leaf came away in a smear that stained his skin. He did not let them choke alone, Bram said. He told each of them something small, something kind. A prince clawed at the table edge. A daughter slid from her chair to the floor, still smiling because she could not shape fear any longer. Voss never raised his voice. He did not stain his cuffs. Silas stepped back from the throne. The maid ran, Bram said. In the hall, a young servant tore through a side door with the infant wrapped tight against her chest. Bram followed with a knife in his hand, cutting down a guard who had not yet realized that loyalty had expired. Silas turned toward the center of the chamber where Bram had knelt. "We did not go up," Bram said. "We went down." The maid vanished into a narrow passage meant for pipes and sweepers. Bram slammed a gate behind them and dragged the girl along stone stairs that had never known light. Above them, boots rang on marble. Silas placed his palm on the cistern wall again. The damp crept under his skin. "The dogs were set loose," Bram said. "They follow warmth. They follow breath." In the dark, water thundered through a low channel. Bram took the infant from the maid and lowered the small body into the flow. The child did not cry. The child only shuddered once, a brief tremor like a bird wing brushing air. Silas felt something shift in his chest and did not know what to call it. "I held the child under," Bram said. "Just long enough." He lifted the infant free and wrapped it again in cloth that had never been clean. The dogs reached the channel moments later and veered away, their noses losing the trail that heat had made. Silas ripped his hand from the stone as if the wall had turned to fire. Bram did not follow Silas out of the cistern at once. He waited until the lantern had settled back into its dull circle and the sound of water had found its slow rhythm again. Then he crossed the chamber and picked up a shard of fallen stone, turning it in his hands as if it were something that could still be mended. "This is not a command," he said when Silas paused near the floodway mouth. "It is not even a request. It is only what remains." Silas did not turn. "You have the right to know what you are," Bram went on. "Nothing more." Silas laughed. The sound was sharp and short and did not belong in a room that once held ceremony. He pointed with his chin toward the toppled thrones, the mold that had eaten their shine, the ceiling that let roots breathe into a place built to hold kings. "This," he said, "this is what remains." Bram opened his mouth, then closed it again. Silas stepped back into the cistern and put his hand on the stone dais. He did not climb it. He only touched the edge, feeling the cold sink into his skin. "You want words," Silas said. "Here they are." He lifted his hand and let the damp cling to his palm. "Kings die. Rats survive." He did not wait for Bram to answer. He turned and walked into the floodway where the ceiling fell low and the air grew thick with the smell of long use. His boots sent small waves ahead of him that broke against the walls and were gone. Bram stayed. The lantern light slid across empty seats and broken carving. It showed the shallow place where knees had pressed into silt not long before, the place where Bram himself had bowed without being asked. He lowered himself there again. Not in honor, not in hope, only because the motion still lived in his body. He knelt in a room that had no one left to rise for, while the dark closed over the way back. Chapter 3. Teeth in the Dark. Voss sat alone in the winter parlor with steam lifting from his cup in thin threads that vanished into perfume. The walls were draped in pale silk that caught the light without showing stain. Heat breathed up through the marble floor and made the room feel like a held secret. Outside the tall window, snow slid from roof tiles and vanished without sound. A courier knelt at the edge of the rug and did not lift his eyes. Voss did not look at him at once. He raised the cup, tipped it with care, and set it back on the saucer so that the ring of porcelain did not clink. He folded his hands and waited until the scent of the tea finished rising. The courier swallowed. "There is word from the lower quarters," he said, "of a thief who carries a mark. The people below speak of it." Voss nodded once, as if the man had recited the weather. "Describe the mark," he said. The courier hesitated, then spoke faster, a shape behind the ear, a ring of small forms like teeth and tails. Voss tilted his head a fraction. "Age." The courier searched his memory, as if afraid to fail at something that could not be checked. "Young. Past boyhood, not yet worn. Perhaps 24 years?" Voss did not speak. He reached for the cup again, took a sip, and held it in his mouth long enough to taste the heat before he swallowed. Then he smiled. It was not the sort of smile that asked for return. It did not lift his cheeks or change the calm of his eyes. It appeared as a slight easing at the corners of his mouth, like a door unlocking in a room no one else could enter. "That will be all," he said. The courier backed away on his knees and rose only when he reached the far wall. When the door closed, Voss rang a bell. 2 men entered from a side corridor. They wore plain coats and carried no visible weapons. Their boots had been scrubbed clean of city filth. "There is work below," Voss said. "You will not wear colors. You will not speak names. You will not be remembered." The men bowed their heads. "A young thief," Voss went on. "Quick hands, dark hair. Moves like someone who has never had the luxury of being slow. I want him brought to me alive, if possible. If not, leave nothing that can be pointed at." The men accepted this without question. They turned and left the room as if it had never been warm. Voss stood and crossed to the window. He rested his fingertips on the glass and watched the snow slide and break. Somewhere beneath his feet, under layers of stone and story, water moved through places that had never known sunlight. He whispered a name that had not been spoken in the parlor for many years. Far below, Silas stopped in the middle of a narrow passage because the rats had gone quiet. He had followed their path since childhood, knew which cracks they favored, which vents they used when storms came. Tonight the usual skitter and scrape had thinned to nothing. He stood in ankle-deep runoff and listened to the empty walls. A small shape darted past him and vanished into a drain that had not been used in seasons. Silas turned in a slow circle, feeling the air with his skin. It held no clear threat, only absence. The market tunnels behind him had lost their noise, too. No arguing, no laughter, no coughs echoing from back rooms. He did not draw a blade. He did not call anyone by name. He pressed his palm to a brick seam and felt vibration where water rushed hard somewhere unseen. He took 3 steps and stopped again when he saw that old nests had been torn open. Bits of cloth and straw floated in the canal, drifting away as if the tunnels themselves were shedding skin. Needle appeared at the mouth of a side crawlway and shook her head without a word. Maribel crossed from a medicine alcove with a bundle held tight against her chest. Her eyes were alert in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Silas raised his hand once. The gesture spread through the passage like a held breath. People stilled. Lanterns were turned low. Above them, silk-caught candlelight and marble gave back warmth to a man who had just remembered something he had misplaced. Below, rats abandoned tunnels they had claimed for years. Between those 2 places, the dark took on weight. Needle ran because she trusted the voice that found her in the side tunnels. It said there was a cache of clean bandage cloth hidden near the old sluice plaza, left behind by surface traders who had fled a flood. It said Maribel had sent the word. It said to hurry. The plaza lay in a wide hollow where the tunnels met the water gates, a place ringed by iron doors thick as shields. The floor was dry there most days, brushed clean by the passing of trade. Tonight the lamps were few, and the space felt wrong even before the trap closed. Needle reached the center ring and slowed. No cloth, no boxes, no Maribel. She turned. The floodgates fell. They did not crash. They sealed with weight, sliding into stone grooves that had not felt movement in years. The sound was not loud. It was final. Torches flared along the walls, one after another, turning shadow into cage bars. Men stepped from behind pillars in old stalls, their boots dry, their coats too clean. They carried hooks and short blades meant for close places. Needle backed away until her shoulders met iron. She pressed her hands flat to the cold gate and felt no give. Silas reached the plaza mouth as the last gate locked. He had run the wrong way first, led by echoes that had never lied to him before. By the time he corrected, the sound of stone sliding into stone had already finished. He did not shout. He stepped through the narrow gap that remained between 2 lowered barriers and stopped, because the men inside had already spread into a ring. He counted them without moving his lips. Enough. Needle saw him and opened her mouth. Before any sound came out, a figure appeared above them on the raised walkway that circled the plaza wall. The torches bent toward him as if they knew where to look. Voss did not hurry. He wore pale gloves and a coat that had never touched sewer water. His boots did not bear stain. He rested one hand on the rail and leaned forward as though observing a mild curiosity. "Good," he said. His voice carried easily without effort. "You came." Silas did not raise his head. He did not lower it either. Voss gestured once, and one of the men pressed a blade edge to Needle's throat without cutting skin. Voss watched Silas, not her. "You misunderstand me," Voss said when Silas did not move. "This is not a threat. I am only correcting a posture." Silas took a step forward. The blade pressed harder. "Do not," Voss said, still mild. "You have survived a long time because you understand which fights are not yours." Silas felt the weight of eyes settle on him. He knew most of the faces in the crowd beyond the gates. Traders, runners, people he had walked past 100 times. None of them spoke. None of them moved. Voss folded his hands on the rail. "Kneel," he said. Silas's breath went shallow. He did not look at Needle because he would not trust what he saw there. Voss tilted his head. "This is not punishment," he said. "It is alignment." Silas bent. The water from the upper canal leaked through a hairline crack in the floor and wet the knees of his trousers. The stone was cold enough to sting. He lowered himself until his weight rested on the plaza tiles that had once carried trade, laughter, argument. The men did not cheer. The crowd did not react at all. The silence did not belong to peace. It pressed inward, a heavy absence that filled the plaza more completely than sound ever could. Voss smiled, and this time it did reach his eyes. He did not release Needle. He did not need to. Voss waited until the water crept high enough to soak the hems of his spotless coat before he reached inside his own sleeve. The men around the ring did not move. The crowd beyond the gates did not speak. Needle's breath came in sharp pulls that shook her whole frame. Voss drew out the crown. It was smaller than it should have been, bent out of shape, its once fine points flattened by use. Dark stains clung to the inner rim where metal should have shone. He held it between thumb and forefinger, as if it were a trinket he had found in a drawer. Silas did not lift his head. He saw the object only as a blur at the edge of sight. "I carry it when I do not feel like walking," Voss said. His voice was mild, the same tone he had used for tea and silk and snow. "The corridors above are long. The servants are slow. This is quicker." He tilted the crown and the liquid inside slid toward the edge. Needle made a sound that broke into sobbing before it finished forming. The contents poured out beside Silas, splashing into the rising sewer water and vanishing in brown ripples that reached his knees. The smell came a breath later. Voss shook the crown once to empty it and glanced at the men on the ring, as if to be sure they had witnessed the act correctly. "Stay," he said to Needle without looking at her. The blade at her neck did not shift. Silas felt his hands begin to shake. He curled his fingers into his palms and forced them still, then failed again. The plaza floor had become a shallow pool. Small waves lapped against the stones where trade once passed. Voss crouched on the rail above him so that his boots did not touch the water. "Names," he said. Silas did not answer. "Your parents," Voss went on. "You know them. Say them." Silas's mouth opened. No sound came out. Voss smiled in a way that showed teeth. "Begin," he said. Silas whispered the first name. Voss repeated it, changing a letter, bending the sound until it no longer belonged to anyone who had lived. Silas said the second name, louder, as if volume could protect it. Voss spoke that one wrong as well, slow and careful, tasting each error. The men around the ring stared at the scene without reaction. Some had their eyes on Voss. Some watched the water climb Silas's shins. None looked at Needle. Silas's breath hitched. He said the names again, both of them. Voss answered with new mistakes, each one placed with precision, not loud enough for the crowd to hear but close enough for Silas to feel the breath on his cheek. Needle sobbed behind him. The sound echoed off the iron gates and came back thinner each time. "Once more," Voss said. Silas closed his eyes and spoke the names as he had never spoken them before, shaping them with the memory of voices he did not own. His words shook. He did not stop. Voss leaned closer until his shadow covered Silas's face. "That is better," he said. "You see how easy it is to adjust history." The water reached Silas's thighs. He could feel the current tug at the cloth, the slow pull toward the drains. Voss lifted the crown again and held it over the pool between them. "I will return this now," he said. He released it. The crown struck the surface with a dull sound and began to sink, its broken points catching light for a breath before the black closed over them. Voss straightened and placed both hands on the rail. He looked down at Silas as one might look at a piece of furniture that had been set in the wrong room. "Kings are just rats who learn to crawl in silk," he said. The crown vanished beneath the rising water. Silas stayed where he was, kneeling in filth that would not remember him. Chapter 4. The Rise of the Rats. Silas did not look back when he left the plaza. He walked until the stone changed under his boots and the air lost the echo of trade. The others followed at a distance, not close enough to speak to him, not far enough to leave. They moved like animals that had learned which storms to avoid. The chapel tunnel lay beyond a spillway that no longer held candles for prayer. Broken icons leaned against damp walls. Wax had pooled in the cracks and hardened into pale scars that never washed away. People came here when they needed quiet and could not afford to ask for it. Silas reached the center and sat on the stone step beneath a fallen carving of a saint, with no face left. His breath shook his ribs. He pressed his hands together and stared at the way his fingers would not stay still. Needle arrived after him. No one said how she had returned. She stood in the tunnel mouth with dirt on her cheek, and anger holding her upright when her legs did not want to. She did not look at Silas at first. She went to the wall and dragged a sleeve across her eyes, then crossed the space in 3 strides and shoved his shoulder with all the strength she had left. He did not fall. Maribel was there a breath later, with her satchel open. She took Silas's wrist and turned it over without asking. "Hold," she said, and cut away the old wrap with a small blade meant for cloth. Her fingers worked with care that did not waste time. She cleaned the skin and drew thread through it while he watched the ceiling. "You should not walk on this," she said. He nodded. "Your grip is weak," she said. He nodded again. She stitched until the shaking slowed enough for the line to stay straight. She tied the knot and pressed the cloth down. Firm, not gentle. Bram appeared from the far passage without ceremony. He did not kneel. He did not speak. She crossed the chapel floor and set a small object on the stone between Silas and the fallen saint. It was a seal ring, iron once, now red with rust. The face bore a shape that had been worn smooth by hands that were no longer warm. Silas did not reach for it. Bram waited. The tunnel held the sound of water and nothing else. Shapes leaned at the edge of the lantern glow, people who had been burned by hope too many times to trust it again. Silas looked at Needle. She stood with her arms folded, chin high, eyes bright with a fury she had not learned how to spend. He looked at Bram, who met his gaze without asking for anything. He looked at the others, the runners and cutters and healers who had learned to keep their lives small so that nothing could take them. Then he picked up the ring. It left a red smear on his skin. He did not lift it like a symbol. He rolled it between thumb and finger, as if testing weight. "Bring me everyone who owes you," he said. "Everyone who hurt you. Everyone you avoid when you take the long way home." No one answered at once. He stood. The motion ran through the chapel like a low current. People straightened because he had. Backs that had learned how to bend did not know why they were unbending, only that it had become possible. Silas closed his fist around the seal until the rust bit into his palm. He did not smile. He did not look larger. He only looked like someone who had stopped leaving rooms before the door closed. The iron rotunda did not wake so much as it filled. Word ran the pipeways faster than water. Runners cut through crawl gaps with messages held in teeth. Children carried the news the way they carried bread, wrapped and hidden, precious, because it could be taken. By the time Silas reached the junction, the space had already begun to crowd. 4 tunnels met there beneath a ceiling carved with shapes that no one used any longer. Old stone marks curved along the arches like ribs. Lanterns were wedged into cracks and set on overturned crates. The light was thin, but it was enough to show faces that had not been in one place at the same time for years. They did not come with blades drawn. They came with hands full. A woman pressed a bundle of dry cloth into the space between bodies and set it at Silas's feet, as if she were returning something that had been borrowed long ago. A boy followed with a small tin of oil sealed with wax. Another set a roll of clean needles beside it and backed away before anyone could refuse. A man laid down a length of sharpened rebar with the careful respect of someone placing a child to sleep. Someone else added bread wrapped in stiff paper that still held the scent of smoke. Last came a child with a single match in a dented tin, holding it like a jewel that had survived a flood. Silas did not reach for any of it. He stood in the center of the rotunda, while the space closed around him, and waited for someone to tell him what he was meant to do. Bram stepped through the ring without asking for room. He carried a band of metal in both hands. It was not bright. It had no points or stones. It was shaped to fit a head, and nothing else. The edges were worn smooth by use that had never been gentle. Silas stared at it. The people leaned forward as one, not with reverence but with hunger that had learned to wear patience. No one sang. No one asked for quiet. A cutter from the west tunnel pushed through with a short blade already in hand. He took Silas's left palm and did not wait for consent. The edge kissed skin and slid shallow and fast. Blood welled, bright against rust. Silas did not curse. He felt the weight of the rotunda move closer, felt breath on his neck and heat against his shoulders. The cutter pressed Silas's bleeding hand to the metal band so that the stain marked it in a way no cleaning could erase. The crown was wrong. It was cold, then not cold at all. It burned the place it touched as if heat had been waiting inside it for someone to claim it. Silas flinched when Bram lifted it. His body drew back before his mind could decide. Bram did not pause. He set the band on Silas's head with care that had nothing to do with ceremony. Silas did not bow. He did not lift his chin. He stood as he always had, like someone waiting for the next blow to come from a place he could not see. Needle pushed out of the crowd with a strip of red cloth twisted around her wrist. It had once tied a scroll that no one could read. She unwound it with her teeth and took Silas's cut hand in both of hers, small fingers smearing the blood across his skin. She looped the cloth around his wrist and knotted it so tight that he felt the pulse there answer it. Her face did not ask permission. It dared anyone to remove it. The sound that followed was not a word at first. It was a rough noise, the scrape of throats that had not practiced speaking together. Then it found shape. "Ours," someone shouted. "Ours," came the answer, louder. The chant did not rise like a song. It hammered. It bounced off the carved stone and came back multiplied, a gutter-born claim that did not pretend to last beyond the next breath. Silas lifted his bound hand and saw the red cloth move with it. He saw the offerings at his feet, the things that mattered where gold could not travel. He saw faces that had never been given permission to want anything lean toward him, as if the ceiling had lifted an inch. The iron rotunda held him there in dim lamp glow, crowned not by right or blessing, but by a crowd that had decided it would not wait for permission again. Silas did not call anyone together. He walked the tunnels and pointed. That was enough. Scavengers became runners, sent ahead with short routes burned into memory. Beggars took the high ledges and broken grates where eyes mattered more than knives. Children slipped through crawl gaps and pipe seams, carrying words the way they carried food, hidden and fast. Smugglers opened back paths that had not seen trade in years and turned them into supply lines that never touched the main ways. Maribel claimed a spill chamber near the chapel tunnel and turned it into triage. She marked safe turns with chalk that would wash away if the water rose. She told Silas which tunnels she would close if he kept spending lives like coin. He did not argue with her in front of others. He argued later, in low voices, about how much pain a victory could hold before it stopped being one. The first clash came at a junction Voss's men had claimed by habit, not by thought. They set torches in a ring and stood in a place that had 4 mouths and too many shadows. Silas did not meet them head-on. He opened a floodgate 2 turns away and let cold water rush through a low passage that had not carried flow in months. The men heard it too late. Their boots slid. One went down and pulled another with him. Someone cracked open a tin of lamp oil and tossed it onto a heated vent. Smoke rolled out thick and sour, blinding and loud in the throat. Runners beat the tunnel walls with scrap to make echoes that came from everywhere at once. Rats poured from side grates where Needle had jammed food and then yanked it free, the swarm bursting out like a thing alive. Needle did not see most of it. She had keys to steal. She crawled along a bypass that only a child could use, her hands scraping stone, her heart loud in her ears. At the far end she cut a rope that held a counterweight, and a heavy gate slid shut behind the men, who thought they were advancing. She crouched in the dark and waited until the sound passed before she moved again. Bram faced a former guard at the mouth of an old pump room. The man held a blade and wore the old colors as if they still meant something. Bram did not rush him. He said a code word that had not been used in years. The phrase meant for a shift change that never came. The guard hesitated because habit had survived loyalty. Bram used that breath to step past and shove the man into a narrow shaft that swallowed sound. They did not take much that night. A crate of short blades, a coil of wire, one man bound and alive, shaking with the knowledge that the tunnels he had hunted in had learned how to hunt back. A runner took a blow meant for someone else, and did not rise until Maribel dragged him clear and worked until the shaking stopped. The bound man talked when the water lapped his boots. He said Voss would not wait. He said there was a plan to cut flow and let smoke take the long routes. He said the rotunda had already been measured. No one cheered. They gathered in a dead end where the lamps flickered and the air tasted of oil and stone dust. Faces were smeared with soot. Eyes were bright, not with joy, but with the memory of being dangerous again. Chapter 5. The Throne of Bones. Voss arrived with light. Lanterns came first, carried on poles so tall they lifted glow above the filth. Porters followed and even steps, their faces blank with practice. Over them all drifted a silk canopy that had never known damp, held aloft by thin rods so that not a thread of it brushed the hall air. Floodgate Hall widened where the deep tunnels gave up and the river took over. The walls were scarred with old flow marks. The floor smelled of iron and long use. The river waited beyond the last gate like a mouth that never closed. Silas stood in the center of the space alone. He had sent everyone away. No guards, no watchers he could see. Only the water, the ceiling lost in shadow, and the memory of every footstep that had ever passed through here. The procession stopped 10 paces from him. Voss stepped out from beneath the canopy without looking down at the grime. His coat was pressed smooth. His gloves were pale. He surveyed the hall as if it were a room he had once owned and misplaced. "You are slouching," Voss said. Silas did not answer. Voss crossed the space in measured steps and stopped close enough to reach him. He lifted one hand and brushed Silas's collar into place with the tips of his fingers. The touch was light. It was also not a question. "There," Voss said. "You were raised better than that." Silas remained still. Voss stepped back and folded his hands. "I never wanted your line erased," he said. "That was never the goal." He glanced toward the river gate where water moved in steady breath. "It is difficult to rule when every generation thinks it must remake the world. I wanted continuity, a shape that could be managed." Silas kept his gaze on the stone behind Voss. "You could have had a room above ground," Voss went on. "Clothes that never hold damp. A name that opens doors. A title that lets you sleep without listening for knives." His tone was not sharp. It was the tone of someone explaining an advantage. "All of that is still possible." He took a small step closer. "You only have to agree to stand where you are placed." Silas felt the river sound deepen behind him. He did not move. Voss nodded once, as if confirming a detail he had suspected. "You have been told that this is a choice between freedom and chains," he said. "That is a poor framing. It is a choice between exposure and shelter, between noise and quiet, between bleeding out in tunnels and living where the floor does not rot." He reached inside his coat. The crown appeared clean in his hands. Its dents had been worked smooth. Its metal caught lantern light and returned it without shame. "I brought this back to what it was meant to be," Voss said. "Not a vessel, not a joke, a symbol that ends arguments before they begin." He held it out. Silas did not touch it. Voss waited, arms steady, posture perfect, as if time were another servant who knew better than to interrupt. "Take it," he said. Silas did nothing. The silence did not break. It thickened. The lanterns hissed. The river kept moving. Voss lowered the crown. His face did not change, but something in the set of his shoulders shifted, a minute correction that had nothing to do with comfort. He placed the crown on the rail beside him and straightened. "That is a mistake," he said. Silas lifted his eyes for the first time. There was no anger in them, only a quiet that did not wait for permission. Water was already at their knees when Voss lunged. He did not draw a blade. He shoved, the way men do when they believe the room itself will side with them. Silas staggered back into the iron grating and felt slime give under his boots. His heel slid. His body pitched. The sluice roar swallowed his breath and pulled him sideways. For a breath he was under. Cold struck his face. The current grabbed his coat and tried to peel it from him like skin. He struck iron with his shoulder and kicked without finding stone. The water filled his mouth before he found the rail and dragged himself up, coughing into sound that never reached the hall. Voss stood where he had been, hands slick, eyes wide in surprise that had not yet learned fear. They closed again because there was nowhere else to go. Silas drove his weight forward and their bodies met with a dull sound that had no grace in it. They slipped and caught and slipped again, boots scraping on algae, hands searching for purchase that did not exist. Voss tried to shove Silas into the flow and missed by inches. Silas caught the rail and tore skin from his palm. Voss laughed. It was a short sound, sharp and broken. Water streaked his face and left clean lines and grime that had never belonged to him. "You were raised better than this," Voss said, breath cutting the words apart. Silas did not answer. The crown lay on the rail where Voss had set it down, clean and bright in lantern light that shook with every rush of water. Silas's hand closed around it without thought. The metal was heavier than he expected. It bit into his skin. Voss saw it and took a step back. Silas stepped forward and pressed the crown into Voss's chest, not as symbol, not as offer, but as weight. Voss's heel found nothing where stone should have been. The sluice took him by the knees and folded him down into the torrent. Silas leaned with him. Water climbed Voss's coat and filled the spaces his breath had claimed. His hands struck at Silas's sleeves, at the crown, at anything that might still hold shape. The current tore his words apart before they could form. There was no speech that belonged to the end, only water and the sound of a body losing its place in it. Silas held until the motion beneath his hands changed, until the crown was no longer pushing back. Then he let go. Voss slid away under the gate and did not return. Silas did not follow the path with his eyes. He stood with water rushing past his thighs and stared at his hands where rust and blood and river had mixed into something he could not name. They shook. He waited until they did not. Silas brought the crown back to the iron rotunda, wrapped in cloth that had once bound wounds. The people were already there. Bruises showed through grime. Eyes had the flat shine of those who had not slept. No one spoke when he stepped into the light. He did not raise his voice. He held the bundle out to Maribel. She took it without ceremony and did not unfold it until she reached the forge at the edge of the junction, the one used for bent rail and tools that had outlived their shape. Someone fed it oil. Someone else set bellows in motion. The flame caught and grew until the air bent around it. The crown went in last. It did not fight the heat. It softened. It slumped. The band that had cut so many paths lost its line and became a glow that no longer remembered heads. Silas waited with his hands at his sides while the metal ran. When the forge was ready, he lifted the ladle meant for slag. The molten crown filled it with a light that did not belong underground. Bram fell into step on his right without asking. Needle followed close enough that Silas could feel her breath when he slowed. They walked the long way out. No one tried to join them. The tunnels made room as if they understood what was being carried through them. Drops fell from the ceiling and flashed white when they touched the metal, then were gone. At the last gate, the river showed itself as a dark sheet that did not care who watched it. Silas tipped the ladle. The metal poured out in a single bright line and met the water with a sound that was not loud but complete. Steam rolled up and hid the place where it vanished. When the air cleared, nothing marked the spot. Silas stood with the empty ladle hanging from his hand and let the river take back what it had been denied. Above, dawn found the sewer mouths and turned the spillways pale. He did not wear a band. He did not carry a sign. He stood at the threshold with Bram on one side and Needle on the other, while the people he had never ruled gathered behind him, moving as one because they had chosen to, not because anyone had asked. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please hit the like and subscribe button. And if you have any suggestions for stories you would like, comment them below. On the right is a video of mine YouTube thinks you'll like. Watch it if you would like more of this content. Have happy dreams.